Welcome to Sticky Med, learning medicine, stick by stick.
Have you ever been reading an exciting piece of news? Maybe a breakthrough drug trial or some incredible finding about human behavior, and a little voice in the back of your head just immediately asks, is that real? Or did that just happen by chance? That skepticism, I think, is one of the most valuable tools you can have when you're consuming information.
It truly is. For anyone looking to understand scientific literature, whether you're preparing for a business meeting or just scrolling through your news feed, the difference between a real discovery and just a random statistical fluke is, well, it's the entire ballgame.
So our mission today is to equip you with the essential statistical vocabulary that researchers use to settle that exact debate.
And we should probably begin with the most fundamental concept of all, random variation. The reality is, the world is messy. And anytime you sample a small part of it, whether it's a group of people, a lab culture, anything, you are going to see natural fluctuation.
Right. We call that luck or coincidence and just, casual conversation. If I flip a fair coin 10 times and it lands on heads 7 times, I'm probably just on a lucky streak. I'm not holding a rigged coin.
Exactly. Statistically, we define that difference, the one between the sample you observed and the true universal reality, as sampling error. It's the unavoidable noise that's caused purely by the luck of the draw when you select your subjects.
It means your sample isn't a perfect mirror of the whole population.
Not a perfect mirror, that's right.
Okay, so let's run with that coin analogy to really set the stakes for research. Let's imagine a drug trial. The researchers are trying to prove their new drug works.
They conduct the trial, and they see what looks like a real benefit. Now, just like with the coin flip, they have 2 possible explanations for that impressive result. Explanation number 1, the real effect. The drug actually works. That's the discovery.
And explanation number 2.
By chance. The drug is useless, but just by random selection, they happen to pick a sample of patients who would have gotten better anyway. This second option, the idea that nothing interesting really happened, is called the null hypothesis.
The null hypothesis. So the idea that it's all just a fluke.
Precisely. And statistics is the tool that calculates how plausible that null hypothesis actually is. When a scientist says, look, my drug lowered blood pressure by 10 points, they aren't claiming certainty. They're using statistics to measure the likelihood that their result was just a random fluke.
Okay, let's unpack this then. How does statistics assign a specific number to that likelihood? How do they decide if the result is a real 10-point drop or just a lucky streak of healthy patients?
That brings us to the p-value, which you can really just think of as the chance calculator.
The chance calculator, I like that.
Formally, the p-value is the probability that you would observe your result, or something even more extreme, assuming the null hypothesis, that is, assuming the drug actually does nothing, is true.
So if a study comes back with a p-value of, say, 0.30, that means there's a 30% chance this whole result was just random luck.
Right. And that's far too high to claim you found something real. We need to be much more confident.
So what's the cutoff?
Historically, scientists have settled on a standard threshold. P has to be less than 0.05.
So less than a 5% chance of being a fluke.
Exactly. If your p-value is below 0.05, you reject the null hypothesis. You're saying the chance of this being a random fluke is so small that I'm confident enough to claim a real discovery.
So if I read a study that says the result was statistically significant, p less than 0.05, the direct translation for me is the researchers are 95% confident this result was not caused by sampling error or random chance.
That is the core idea. But, and this is a huge but, just because a result is statistically significant doesn't mean it's actually useful. This is the difference between statistical significance and clinical significance. Statistical significance just tells you if the result is reliably not 0. Clinical significance tells you if the result is big enough to matter in the real world. That part depends on the effect size.
Give me an example of something that's statistically significant, but, clinically useless.
Okay, imagine a new diet pill. It's tested on, say, 10,000 people. And because the sample size is massive, the study detects a statistically significant weight loss. P is less than 0.001.
Wow, so very confident.
Super confident. But then you look at the effect size, and the average weight loss was half a pound over 6 months.
Half a pound.
It's a real effect. It's not chance. But no doctor, no patient would ever consider half a pound clinically useful. The effect is real, but it's negligible.
So when you're reading a headline, you need to see both, a strong p-value and a large relevant effect size.
Precisely. The p-value tells you if it's real. The effect size tells you if you should care.
Okay, so if the p-value is our tool for managing random noise, let's shift to something far more dangerous. Because not every study error is chance. Let's talk about the difference between random error and systematic error, which we call bias.
This is maybe the most important distinction in all of this. Because while we can manage chance, bias can instantly invalidate an entire study.
We talked about random error being like an archer with shaky hands. The arrows just spray everywhere, scattered around the target.
Yes. The nature of random error is unpredictable noise. It scatters your data, making the true signal harder to see. But, and this is the key, it averages out over time. That's why the fix is simply to increase sample size. More observations reduce the noise.
But bias, that systematic error, is different.
Fundamentally different. Bias is a persistent distortion. It means every single arrow lands 10 feet to the left of the target, no matter how steady the archer is. It's not random. It pushes the outcome in a consistent wrong direction.
And what causes that systematic push?
A flaw in the study's design. Think of selection bias. This happens when the way you pick your patients systematically favors one outcome. For example, recruiting people for a weight loss study only from ads you placed at a marathon finish line.
Right, those people are already healthier, they're more active, their results are going to be skewed from the start.
Exactly. Or you could have information bias. This is about how you gather the data. Think of a broken scale that always reads 5 pounds heavy. Or a study asking people about their drinking habits, and people systematically underreport because they feel judged. That's distortion.
And the critical realization is that you could enroll 10 million people in that study, and if the scale is broken, the result will still be wrong.
That's the fatal consequence of bias. A bigger sample size doesn't fix it. It just confirms the wrong answer with more certainty. The only fix for bias is a better design up front. You cannot fix it later.
That's a powerful point. So researchers try to minimize bias, but they use the p-value to manage the random chance that's left over. Now, let's look at the two monumental mistakes researchers can make when they interpret their results.
Right. When we do a study, we never know the absolute truth. We only have our sample. We're making an educated guess. And to understand the errors, the jury trial analogy is, well, it's unbeatable.
Okay, so in a clinical trial, the statistical process is like a courtroom. The defendant is our null hypothesis.
Exactly. The null hypothesis, H-color is always. The defendant is innocent. In other words, the drug does nothing. The alternative hypothesis, H-1 is, the defendant is guilty. The drug works.
And the researchers need evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that low p-value to reject the idea of innocence and declare the drug guilty. Or effective.
And the first type of mistake is called a type I error, which we symbolize with alpha. This is the false positive.
So in the courtroom, that would be
convicting an innocent person. You find the defendant guilty. You reject the null hypothesis when, in reality, they are innocent. You conclude there's a difference when none actually exists.
The public consequence of that is huge. You approve a drug that gives people false hope.
The medical consequence is substantial waste. Patients take a drug, they risk side effects, they pay enormous costs, all for a treatment that is scientifically useless. That's why we set the acceptable risk for this mistake, alpha, very low, usually at 5%.
Okay, so if type I is the false positive, the opposite must be the type 2 error, or beta, the
Yeah.
false negative.
This is letting the guilty go free. You fail to reject the null hypothesis. You say the evidence wasn't strong enough, when in reality the drug did work. You miss a true effect.
The consequence of this feels devastating, maybe even more so than the type I error.
It is the tragedy of a missed opportunity. Imagine a genuine cure for a rare disease. The drug works beautifully, but the study was a little too small, and the p-value came back at just 0.07.
So it missed the cutoff.
It missed the cutoff. The study reports no statistically significant difference, and a potentially life-saving treatment is shelved forever. A cure is lost to the world.
But we accept a higher risk for this mistake, don't we?
Yes. Society tends to prioritize avoiding the false alarm of a type I error. So we usually accept a type 2 risk beta of about 10 to 20%. It's a trade-off. We're willing to accept a higher risk of missing a true cure than the risk of promoting a useless one.
That really sheds a new light on the ethical tensions in science. And that risk of missing a cure leads us directly to the concept of power.
Right. If the type 2 error, beta, is the probability of missing the cure when it exists, then power is its exact opposite. Power is 1 minus beta. It's the probability of correctly finding a difference when that difference really exists. It's a measure of the study's ability to succeed.
So if the industry standard accepts a type 2 risk of 20%, then the standard goal for power is 80%. We want to be 80% sure that if the drug works, our study will find it.
80% is the magic number. And the most common way to increase power is to increase sample size. A larger pool of participants makes the signal of the drug's effect much harder for random noise to hide.
Because it's easier to prove a small effect exists if you have 100,000 data points than if you have just 10.
Precisely. You also get more power if the effect size is large. I mean, a drug that cures cancer is just inherently easier to detect than one that slightly reduces a minor symptom.
But the reality is that many studies, especially early on, are underpowered. They just don't have enough money or enough patients to hit that 80% goal.
And that is a huge problem in science. An underpowered study means researchers are knowingly accepting a very high risk of making a type 2 error. They risk shelving a potential cure simply because they couldn't afford a big enough study to prove it. The takeaway is that scientific confidence is an extremely delicate balancing act. Every scientific conclusion represents a calculated risk, a careful negotiation between the risk of a type I error, leading to useless claims, and the risk of a type 2 error, which means profound discoveries get missed.
So when you look at a statistically significant finding now, you can look past the headline. You know that what they're really asking is this a real, repeatable biological fact, or is it just a statistical accident caused by looking at one weird slice of the population that won't happen again?
And we should add, understanding this transforms your skepticism even further. The scientific community is, right now, grappling with what's sometimes called the p-value crisis, the fact that many significant results, p less than 0.05, fail to replicate when other labs try to repeat them.
If a result is 95% certain, why would it fail to replicate?
Because that 5% chance of being wrong is still there. And in a world with thousands of researchers running thousands of trials, those false alarms, they inevitably start to add up. Understanding this helps you appreciate that the p-value isn't the final word. It's just the beginning of a much deeper conversation